welcome to the very first, the maiden voyage, and it's always Dan, the maiden voyage of the Patron series of interviews by Cara St. Louis. And I think this is going to be a marvelous conversation. That's really all I'm interested in is these magical, marvelous conversations with people whom I consider to be magicians. Dan is down in Byron Bay right now, so it's evening there. It's morning where I am in London. He's got a fantastic bio. I want to read that right now, but I have to go back to where I can see it, and I will. 2 seconds. Here we go. Dan Schreiber, magician. Okay, I am, but it's true. His bio says this: creative director of Starseed Gardens since 2005. Gardener, visionary. He put gardener first, by the way, which I find interesting. Visionary, father, super important as far as I'm concerned. Inspirational storyteller, speaker, and lecturer. His most recent direction is exploring systems of perpetual renewal and designing human interfaces to enable harmonic human communication, relationship, and custodianship of the natural world. Dan is a professional photographer, videographer, and multimedia producer. He is a self-taught herbal healer, ecologist, and landscape gardener with a forte for creative direction and vision. His work with organic plant growth enhancers is on the cutting edge of increasing plant and soil biota health to support the flowering of human awareness via vibrational nutrition. Oh, I want to talk about that. He was there for the very storm-tossed maiden voyage of the Bay Lecture, and he's the guest on the maiden voyage today. Dan, welcome. Thank you for being here. Such an amazing thing to have you here. Can you hear me? There you go.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, God, yes. I invite you. We do try to connect. And it just like all the time. So it's been just about a year since I was at Starseed. And I have to say it was an amazing experience. So because you're from South Africa, yes? And
yes.
You're in Byron Bay via London, I think. How did you come across Starseed? How did you build it? What was your purpose? What's your aim now? And what is it?
Okay, so unlike what many people may think, it's not, the reference is not seeded from the stars, but more the return. So the idea is, you remember like I think it was in the 60s when there was a race to the moon, there was a strange thing that happened. A whole bunch of nations all kind of competed in a positive sort of way instead of, in a negative way, like preparing for war,
right?
With a common goal. And now that goal in some sense is the race to Mars. But what will we do on Mars if we get to Mars?
Right.
More importantly, the focus comes is if we were going to seed another system with life, what would we choose? What would be the best things? And of course, all our ancient lineages, all our ancestors, all the tribes who've lived close to the earth, they've been doing this for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, gathering the best soft technology, the best plants, the best fermentation techniques, dyeing. And because they were doing it without like a modern type technology, everything was biodegradable, everything was renewable, everything was adaptable and living. And therefore, those systems were essentially perpetual and open. They were unlimited. And so if we were to seed another system, we'd want to seed it with life, not technology that needs constant maintenance, constant readjusting, constant updating, because that's such a drain on the resource. We want to be able to literally take a seed to seed a star, because within that seed is already the whole forest. In that seed is the unlimited potential. In that seed is not only the directions of how the tree needs to unfold, but how to adapt to a changing climate, how to produce more of itself. And so what we would be delivering is an open, intelligent, adaptable, living system. And so Starseed is kind of a gathering place of all of these kind of ancient wisdoms and technologies, and working out how we can modernize them for a recolonization. But at this time, it's almost like a reversal. We're trying to recognize what's essential for living systems to be harmonic, to be perpetual, to benefit all, and to be abundant. And this is, of course, a big dream, but it's not. It's not really out of the grasp. This is what the whole of nature and all our ancestors did.
Yeah, nothing's out of our grasp, Dan. Nothing. Yeah. Absolutely nothing is out of our grasp. In fact, it's much closer to our capabilities than we know now, and I think that's really important. Getting our minds back around that kind of thing is really important. Which reminds me, actually, I saw something that you did last night that I hadn't seen before. I watched your TED Talk, and it's a fantastic bit. It really is. It told me so much about you. Okay, I got to do it. Stop the presses. What is the feather in your beard about, dude? Because by now my people are going, what is it? Tell me that first.
Okay, so the feather is actually a South African bird. It's called a guinea fowl. It's potentially a totem of mine. But what I really like about it is, I'll put it closer to the camera. Maybe you could see.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Oh, it's exclamation points almost. Really?
Yeah. Well, so what it is, this one's actually a flight feather, but because they're ground birds, but they fly when they need to.
Yeah.
And the beauty is they've got these white dots on a black background, kind of like a star field.
Yeah.
But from a distance, it's a gray. So it's a pattern that breaks up the actual shape and color, like a type of disruptive camouflage, which they need when they're in the South African bush, because there's probably everything wants to have a go at it.
Yeah, I bet.
But the reason I like it is because it's not white or black. It's kind of like this nature's yin yang so it makes a gray, and it makes a disruptive pattern in your mind, and it allows you to blend in a way. If you look carefully, it stands out, but if you're not looking carefully, it's a blend in. And I think kind of we'll probably wind or meander back to that idea of essentially like a type of spiritual Trojan horse of how we need to deal with this impending kind of oppressive system that we find ourselves in, is not to oppose it because it's got all the money, all the guns, all the resources. It would be fruitless. But there's a clever David and Goliath process here where we can sneak under the radar, join it, and then take it apart from inside, much like Neo does when he's works out that he's part of the Matrix and it's part of him.
I agree with you completely, and it's taken me a while to get to that sort of understanding as well, that there's a certain way you have to bring material because people are conditioned to accept material in a certain way now, and then show them why certain things just aren't worth fighting anymore, that you can acknowledge them, because we're at the next layer down, which is understanding us in the picture, and then we go from that to an act of will, which is really freeing ourselves and making ourselves sovereign. So I saw something the other day that I quite liked. What was it? It was something, I'm going to paraphrase it. It was something like, don't beg the government, freedom is not begging the government to do something for you. Freedom is doing it and then daring them to stop you. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of take.
Absolutely. It's like anywhere where we find we've given away our responsibility to do something, it creates systems of dependence, and that's where our energy leaks. And we luckily enough have this amazing piece of technology, each one of us, that is super disruptive in a very interesting way, and that's the heart, and it actually creates like this quantum field effect, this loving field that literally transmutes everything and anything. So actually creating resistance is a form of persistence. You end up supporting the very thing you're fighting against. So the beginning of that shift is when we accept things the way they are. That initiates a change. But when we cultivate gratitude for those things, it means not only do we accept them, but we recognize that they essentially providence, that they divinely orchestrated. And then as soon as that happens, we recognize that there's no separation. There's this divine harmonic moving through everything, and all we needed to do was to vibrationally meet that match. And that's what this attitude of gratitude is about, you know?
Hence, Dan, why there's such a massive manipulation of frequency going on all the time.
Sure.
Because that's the opposite, trying to mess with our ability to with our natural frequency and our ability to create via frequency, period, end of story. But you know what I didn't do that I really want to do, because I don't know the answer to this yet. I want you to start at South Africa. Can you start at South Africa and then take me up to Starseed real quick? How did you get there? Or do you want to? Can you?
No, that's easy. So I was born in South Africa during the apartheid era. I grew up, I love nature. My whole back garden was a menagerie. I had birds and tortoises and snakes and chameleons. And, you know, of course, my mother was freaked out by creatures all over the place. But Johannesburg, where I grew up, was actually a very violent city. One of the most violent cities on the planet at the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, it just didn't work for me at all. So that as soon as I could, I left for university in Cape Town, which was by the coast. And so in order to leave Johannesburg, I had to do a marine biology, a Bachelor of Science in marine biology, and, you know, all the life sciences. So that was an excuse for me to say goodbye to my mum and go, hey, I've got to go to the ocean. And of course, I spent that time at university windsurfing every day. And
oh my God, you're so brave. You're so brave. I've seen the videos of the sharks in that area.
Yeah. Well, when you're windsurfing, you're going fast, you know, and you know, at least you've got a chance. And luckily, I had like a type of semi-photographic memory. So before each exam, I just borrow a friend who had good handwriting file and read through the file and do the exams. But what it made me realize is that university was just the same as school. We were just feeding to our teachers and professors what they wanted to hear. And it was just basically preparing people for the workplace, commercial research. And it kind of took the sting out, you know, like it took away some of my passion for nature.
Sure, yeah.
I then moved to the UK for 10 years, where I lived in London, and I was involved in the music industry and music video and running around in it was Summer of Love club scene, rave scene, festival scene. And that was great. And of course, my introduction into the world of plant medicine and psychoactive substances, neurognostics. And, you know, instantly returned to the world of my childhood, where I realized the way I was seeing the world back then was intact and living. And then to revisit that and see that everything was alive and conscious was pretty mind-blowing. And then I started a water gardening company. So I was making ponds in London, and you know, very soon London became too much of a city for me, and I wanted to escape back to, you know, somewhere a little more like my childhood in Southern Africa. And so I ended up leaving and coming to Byron Bay, Australia, where I moved to the rainforest and built a little house out of wood up there in the rainforest, trying to retreat in I guess like in my you could call it my prepper phase in the
Are you still prepped? You're still ready?
Well, no. What happened was at that stage, I thought there was an impending war. Bush had just, gone back into Iraq. And
Yeah.
from what I thought was going so swimmingly, all sort of turned a bit dark. And then I thought, all right, I need to go and grow my own food and have my own water and hide out in the forest and do all that stuff, which I did.
Yes.
And from
Still
being
valid.
self-sufficient or independent, I recognized that, if the shit hit the fan, we need to everyone needs to be on some level. Otherwise, it would just turn into a free-for-all. And so I thought, maybe what needs to happen is this needs to be more shareable. And all these ideas of how to live in harmony and sustainably need to be a little more out in the open. And of course, Byron Bay was already a center for that. Byron Bay
was okay.
Yeah, they had an Aquarius festival in the early 70s, and a whole bunch of people from Sydney had moved up here and thought, wow, this is great, and stayed. And so from the Aquarius festival, we had this whole counterculture and hippie culture in the hills here. And of course, this became then the birthplace of permaculture. And that rapidly spread around the world. It was also happened to be the area where the first successful forest protests occurred.
Wow.
Yeah, and so there were a lot of seeds for the environmental movement happening here, with a big crossing with California. And people got into growing their own food organically and building houses out of materials,
straw bales and stuff. Yeah,
harmonic habitation. And so for me, that was when I was looking for a place that was all really attractive, because I wanted to move to a small place, but that was still open-minded and cosmopolitan, not parochial.
Right.
And this was it. And I arrived here, it was like coming home. I was like, wow. And the interesting thing was all the plants that I was growing indoors when I lived in London.
Yeah.
I had palms and ferns. They happened to be the same palms and ferns that were growing in the rainforest here. So it was literally like stepping into a dream.
I bet.
And yeah, it was mind blowing. And it, like I said, it was like coming home. And so then I established in around about 2004, in I guess what you could call a vision. I was flown over a piece of land and said, go there, and that's a good place to start a garden and to set up I guess like an earth school. And so that was the birth of Starseed Gardens. I went in the flesh then to find this piece of property. It had been in the hands of some pig farmers for 3 generations,
which is great.
And they
it's fantastic.
Just got to the point where they said, look, we're done, we're selling. And I turned up and said, look, I'd like to grow some gardens here. And they were like, great, because they didn't want their essentially ancestral lands to be turned into subdivision.
Right.
And so they gave me an option to buy. I didn't have any money. I ran around looking for money, and on the final hour, I managed to do some deal with someone, and I borrowed the money to buy the land, and that was the birth of Starseed Gardens, which is now 12, 13 years later, beautiful, lush.
It is. I've been there, everybody.
Yeah, and
it's fantastic.
The idea is to teach how to grow your own food, how to grow your own medicine, how to grow your own fuel and fiber and building material, how to literally grow your own economy and grow whatever it is we need. And that today there's, that's easy in a sense. The hardest part is actually the social permaculture, people getting
always, yes. Yeah. Comparatively, yes, that is absolutely the hardest part. But being sovereign is, this everything about being sovereign is what we should be about right now. Sure. And that's, if we need to focus on that. We need to focus on that, and then anyway, I want to ask you about you, so I don't want to get started. Some of the stuff I want to talk to you about that I came across last night. I was I was just so blown away by this question that you asked your audience about is there anybody in the audience who's indigenous or
Yeah,
who's okay? Because you got me on that one for sure. You got everybody on that one, didn't you?
yeah, yeah,
Probably because what they thought you meant, because you were in Byron when you filmed this, they thought you
yeah.
meant, did they have some Aboriginal blood in
Hmm.
in them? But that's not what Dan meant. Dan, can you talk about that particular clipping of the thought?
Yeah. So this is part of, I guess you could call it Agenda 21. Uh, when I was a kid growing up, I remember hating humans because I love nature so much, and they were showing people cutting down the rainforest and polluting the land and destroying the oceans and whaling. And as a little kid who loved nature, I just thought that was abhorrent. But that was part of the plan, was to kind of pitch this idea of moving people into these encampments, these cities, and creating national parks which excluded humans. And you've got to remember, every landscape on the planet has evolved with human interaction, whether they're the Great Plains or
Right.
the outback. Humans in harmony have been custodians and have looked after these places, sometimes better than worse, but it's quite a modern colonial idea of humans being bad for the landscape. This is a modern industrial colonial mindset.
Right.
So, for me, it was really looking down the barrel of how do we reverse that energetically? How do we take this idea that we disconnected and reconnected? So one of the first big splits, along with all the other racism, sexism, uh, you know, was this idea of people who were indigenous, that they'd been there before, and then these other colonists, like where had they come from? What planet? So many times people are thinking we're not indigenous. Those other people, the old world living in harmony with the land, are indigenous. What does that make us? So when I ask the question, who's indigenous, what I'm really looking for people to go into is the idea of course we're all indigenous. We come from the planet. It's just because we disconnected and our minds have been colonized, we
Right.
see ourselves as separate.
Yes.
And there was a beautiful story told by Bill McDonough, I believe it was, and he said there was some scientists at a conference, and they were just working out about plutonium burial. This is, one of the most toxic substances on the planet, and they were trying to work out a glyph that was translinguistic, so that people in the future would know not to dig at that place because beneath the ground there was plutonium.
Mm-hmm.
And at the lunchtime of the conference, there happened to be a First Nation American group at the same campus having another sort of conference. So the scientist said to them, what would you do? And these guys turned around to them and said, don't worry, we'll tell them. In other words, we're not going anywhere.
Right.
Whereas the mindset of the scientist was leaving. Like, we're not going to be here anymore, so we need to create this idea so someone else coming and colonizing the planet will know not to dig here. They were going, hold on, we ain't going anywhere. In your mind, you're all leaving.
Yeah.
And this is the colonized mind that
Yes.
is, you could call it a psychic parasite, but this is what we've all been infected with.
Exactly.
And the work of John Lamb Lash, his book Not in His Image,
Mm-hmm.
talks a little bit about the Nag Hammadi tests,
Mm-hmm.
and the Gnostic texts, which your audience may be familiar with. But
some of them will be, yeah.
Yeah, the importance of this today is literally that as soon as we went into this idea of monotheism, this forgetting that the earth itself was the goddess Sophia and that was sacred, as soon as we just started to worship a wrathful male sky deity called
Right.
Yahweh.
Right.
And we have the birth of Judaism and Christianity and Islam.
Right.
These religions literally forced a type of colonization of the mind to forget that the land was sacred. It allowed us to lay waste to the forests and natural habitat because there was an afterlife, a heaven we would be going to, as long as we played the right computer game, which, in Islam, it's bow down 5 times a day to this. And if you're Jewish, it's grow this like this and do this and say this at this time. And so what we find out is that these religions are like a type of, I think the guy who wrote *Sapiens*, Yuval, he talks a bit about it. It's like a computer overlay. It's so we caught up in a type of computer game.
Yes.
Where we look at our world through the lens of maybe either statism or religion, and then we play the game. And if we play the game right, we get the points, which is
exactly
insane when you think about it. You're like,
yeah, based on the premise
that this situation.
Based on the premise that someone else owns this planet, in this case it would be Yahweh, and that we're just here by his permission if we're good. That kind of stuff really separates us from. Yes, thank you. That's brilliant. I'm going to have to incorporate some of this in my thinking and writing. I will make sure that you get the reference for this stuff, but I'm just warning you that there's a lot of, I'm not warning you. I'm saying to you that there's some amazing stuff here that's causing my thinking to be enhanced and deepened and changed. And when that happens, I always like to credit the people who do that for me. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, absolutely.
Well, so just to finish that point.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Most people, that the best kind of reference, and I've been doing a series of talks called Our Most Precious Resource, which focus on human attention and human awareness.
Yes.
And of course, because that awareness as a type of conscious excretion literally can create whole worlds. Of course, it's so precious. And of course, then the biggest game is how to steal or take our attention and divert it and use it to create other people's worlds, whether it's Facebook and social media or corporations. And so I use the example of that kids movie or kid adults movie, Monsters, Inc.
Yeah.
And for those of you who haven't seen it, it's about these beings in another dimension who have interdimensional doorways or gateways or portals, and they enter our dimension and scare kids, give them nightmares, and capture their screams, and then use that energy to power their world.
Boy, they told us the truth in that one, didn't they?
Yeah, and then of course, on this other world, the monsters. There's a revolution with the monsters because of one of the monsters falling for one of these young kids, and so through this act of love, the monsters then break the racket in their world and realize that actually capturing laughter, human laughter, is 10 times more powerful than human fear. And so they bump off the guy or let's say they root out the guy from the power company in their realm.
Yeah.
He's controlling everything. And then they form this alliance with this other world. And then their job is to come and make kids laugh, because the laughing powers the other world. And of course it powers this world too. And so this is a very interesting and simplistic idea of the challenge we have with these interdimensional portals and these psychic parasites is how do we entrap them in love so that they realize they're part of us, and that the only way they will truly benefit is if we truly benefit. So it's kind of got to be this win-win situation. And at the moment, humans are caught up in the idea that it's us or them. And this is, again, part of the colonial mindset. And there can only be one winner, and one loser. And as if we're all one, we're going to be the winner and loser.
Right. Very okay. Listen, the other thing I want to talk to you about really quick before I forget came also from that TED Talk. You talked about combing the hair in the mirror. Do you remember that?
Sure.
Oh, do that one, please.
So, yeah. Just while I remember,
Yeah.
There's a trend here in the sovereignty movement to call the people, the original people here of Australia, the Aborigines and not Aborigines, because ab means not, so like abnormal.
Okay, great.
So Aboriginal would be like not Aborigine, which is part of the colonial undermining of those original people.
Yes.
So and using the words is we've got to control the narrative by controlling the lexicon and defining the words we're going to be using and how we use it so that we can steer the narrative. Otherwise, it gets steered for us. So the idea of
go ahead. Sorry.
The idea of this mirror is very interesting because mirrors were sacred to most of our ancestral cultures. For example, the Egyptians. The mirror was very sacred, and the reason the mirror is sacred is because of the reflective nature, and all the sages and saints before us have come to the realization that the world is mirror-like and reflective, and it reflects the idea of who we think we are. So there's a saying in the Talmud, we do not see the world the way it is, we see it the way we are. You see, and so this idea is, if you imagine as a tool, you looking at a reflection in the mirror. If you woke up in the morning and your hair was out of place, would you comb the hair of your reflection? Of course not, because no matter how long you combed, there would be no change. But if we comb our own hair, then of course the reflection changes. And so this from a spiritual point of view is really the idea that true change only really happens within us.
Right.
First, and then we see its reflection out there. And so there's no point in trying to fight a battle out there. The biggest battle is in here. And this has been the spiritual landscape, since our earliest writings, whether they're Buddhist or pre-Buddhist, is this idea that all change starts or is initiated within. And this is these ideas of these controlling mechanisms which are stealing our attention are constantly trying to. Britannia is divide and conquer. You can't divide and conquer people unless they don't know who they are. Right. And so there's this constant idea of disconnecting us from the idea of the reflection, so that we then will see our brothers and sisters and animals and forests as separate. And it's through that separation that enables us to wage war or to cut down the forest, which is, of course, insane when you think about it, but it can only happen to a disconnected mind, a colonized mind. A
colonized mind. I think we should just continue to say that, because you know what, saying a colonized mind and putting it together with the word colonial is not something that people have been doing at all yet, which means that they will actually hear that, because it's a fresh way to say it. Things get sort of, when they get said a lot over a period of time, they empty themselves of their meaning for people. In a way, do you know, because you just hear it too much. But this idea of the colonial and the colonized mind, I think, is something very, very important, and it needs to be kept at the forefront. Now, one of the other things that I got from listening to your stuff recently was you realize, because I know you do, that one of the things that my old writing partner and I were working on was this idea that everyone really knows now, that there's something like 24,000 units of biophotonic energy that go through the human body each and every day. And that's part of what makes us attractive to any, like, Don Juan and the Castaneda stories, any entity that might feed off something that we produce, whether it's a negative energy, a positive energy, in this case, biophotonic energy. And my wonderment was always, if this biophotonic energy is something that is desired by a parasitic type entity, why not just take it? But they take it after we've had it, after it goes through us. We transform it in some way. And you were talking about, oh, it's just made me feel so good. You were talking about how our transformation of this light, this biophotonic energy, we actually feed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we actually feed the plants and things around us with this transformed energy did I get that right?
Yes. So the idea is there's humans can create different frequencies of energy, and if you give out a lot of energy, you become drained, because our part of this colonial mindset is this idea of economics and scarcity around limitation. And if you've got a limited amount of energy and you give a lot away and you don't follow your own body's economy, then you become depleted and you have to find it somewhere else. And what our ancestors have told us is when we experience that level of depletion, that's when disease kind of takes over and it shows us where we're leaking energy. Now, what happens is, so humans emit this energy, and it's been called orgone, chi, prana, biophotons.
Right.
It's the same stuff. It's this living energy, and we digest it from our landscape through all of our senses. So, for example, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we breathe are all ways of us digesting our landscape, this living light landscape. Eating happens to be the grossest, but it's another way in which we digest energy. And of course, human body itself cannot digest food. Only microbes do. And so, essentially we're maintaining an internal intestinal garden and feeding that, and that's then feeding us. And that's another whole story we can get into in
interesting though. Yeah.
But humans also have access to an unlimited and inexhaustible energy. And the best analogy for that is the sun.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how many solar panels we put on the planet or how many forests we plant. So even though there's all those as many absorptive solar surfaces, leaves and silicon crystals, it does not deplete the sun. The more we have, the sun, if anything, responds to that by being able to glow brighter. And this is a very interesting idea. And our ancestors explored this in the idea that the sun is literally the heart. Remember, I was using that metaphor of the mirror. Well, when we see the sun is the heart. And our heart, when it goes into a very specific quantum phase, which we call love, it's radiant and inexhaustible. Right. In other words, when you're in love, that energy transcends not only space and time. It doesn't matter how many other people are tapping into that love. It's inexhaustible. In other words, you do not diminish. You actually rise, and so does everyone connected to that. And this is the natural economy of things. Just like, when we're at school, we learn 1 + 1 = 2. But in nature, 1 can equal infinity. If I have 1 lotus seed and I plant that, I get a lotus plant that has 100 flowers, and each one, 1,000 seeds.
Yes.
And then each one of those seeds is another whole lotus plant. So 1 equals infinity. Right. We weren't taught that at school. Same as if you have, let's say, a turtle. You've got 1 turtle. You cut it in half. You don't have 2 halves of a turtle. You put them back together. You don't have 1 turtle anymore. You see?
Yeah.
So the mathematics we were taught was for this economic system
Yes.
of dependence, where one system increases and the other has to automatically deplete. Whereas the living natural systems of pure energy that are built on love or this infinite energy are not of that ilk.
Right.
And therefore, because we have a generator within our chest, each one of us, which is called the human heart, we actually create a biophotonic field that, if we're in love, is literally inexhaustible. I mean, you think about it just from an organ point of view. The heart starts when you I think it's 32 cells. You start the mitosis process of the egg and sperm fertilization, and then you get mitosis. You get 2 cells, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64. Round about that, you get what's called a blastula, and then it becomes a donut. And then at that point, all the cells synchronize and start to pump together. And so that becomes the central nervous system, but it becomes the heart. So first and foremost, the first thing we are as an organism is a human heart.
A heart with a beat, which is music.
A heart with a beat. And so then that goes all the way till our last breath, you know? So that inexhaustibleness is is hardwired into our natural world.
Right.
And so this heart, there've been beings, or maybe not, on the planet like Christ beings and saints and Buddhas, and the way in which they portrayed in the artwork of this radiance, this, I believe, is beings who have worked out that love is the natural phase of humanity when they are being like a sun, a radiant being. And then other beings that come into their field may go through spontaneous awakening or spontaneous healing, but their systems literally fed without diminishing of that other being's system. And so the idea is that the human body, when it operates correctly, is a field broadcaster and generator. It's living energies flowing through it, and then it puts its own spin or flavor, and then it then radiates, and every plant, every animal, every other human we come into contact with, the whole planet, is then part of that feeding system, and so then humans on the surface of the planet become part of its nervous system, part of its energy system, and part of its awareness. That thin film of life becomes the membrane or the membrane, and then all the membranes, whether it's around your cell or around the earth itself, is where all the intelligence and consciousness and living energy, that's the hotspot for this biophotonic energy. Now, what parasites don't understand is, and humans don't understand, is that parasites are only parasites because they're forced into that situation. If humans create enough energy by being in love, then parasites' terrain changes and they go from parasites into symbiotes. And so if we're looking at tissue cells or cancerous cells or cells in the body that have gone rogue or have become pathogenic, when we change the terrain, they often then can switch from being pathogenic into beneficial. And I think this is one of the most important modern rediscoveries in medicine, is that the war against what we call pathogens through antibiotics is impossible to win. It's like fighting ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
We are, for every trillion cells we have in our body, there are 10 trillion other beings, bacteria, viruses, fungi, phages, and so if you look at that genetically, because the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, is itself bacterial in origin, by genetics, we are less than 1% human by genetics.
Wow.